Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova. I'm privileged to be joined by Otangelo Grasso and Emory Moynagh. Emory is a creationist, a young earth creationist, a graduate student in biology, and I'm excited for him. He may be coming close to the finish line here at the end of this year. I'd like to offer prayer to begin this discussion, and then I'll describe everything to the audience. So let's just open in prayer. Lord, on this Halloween day when it seems the devil is being celebrated, be with us, Lord. You've commanded us to fear you only, not to fear other gods. So, Lord, be with us. Here in the United States, we have an election looming, and please cleanse out the evil leaders in our government. We pray for the situation in Ukraine and Russia and the risk of nuclear war, Lord. We don't know when the end is, but you commanded us to pray for our leaders. I'd lift up Emory as he's now getting close to the finish line of graduate school. Please help him with his comprehensive exams. Help him to excel, Lord. Help him to bring glory and honor to your kingdom, that he can show that someone can be a creationist and also an outstanding scientist. I thank you for Otangelo and his dedicated work on his books, and grant him success in publication. And thank these two gentlemen for being so willing to support me these last 2 years in a variety of ways, from being willing to be my debate partner or co-hosts. And we lift up Cindi Lincoln as she may be joining us. She has a lot to deal with. Strengthen her, prosper her, Lord. Bring justice for her ills. We ask this in the blessed name of our Lord and Savior, the Creator, Jesus Christ. In his name we pray, amen. Guys, it's great seeing you. Otangelo, it's kind of late there in Rio de Janeiro time. Tell us about your book. I'm going to give you some free advertisement. Let me introduce you a little bit first. I was scrambling to get alternates, and Otangelo, Tino Groppi was among the first to be alternates in my debate with Aron Ra, and it ended up being Cindi Lincoln. And I told Otangelo I'm indebted to him for his willingness to assist. So Otangelo, I'm going to give you some chance to give some free advertisement for your book on abiogenesis, and I want to thank you for all your work. So take it away. Oh, you're muted, Otangelo.
Yes, thank you, Sal. Well, my book is actually already available on Amazon. Just check for my name. This is about the origin of life, and I was intending to write a book including all topics, but I saw that would not be possible because it's a huge topic. So after I was with about 330 pages, I said, well, let me just publish this one as volume 1, which I did. So basically it is about describing the eventual origin of the 4 building blocks of life, the macromolecules and nucleotides, phospholipids, amino acids, and carbohydrates, and showing that mainstream science has basically no plausible explanation whatsoever, and there are huge problems. And I'm exposing that, and then I am also dedicating to the information problem. So I'm also dedicating to.
I'm sorry about the echo, Otangelo. That was on me.
Yeah.
I apologize to the viewers. Please please restart. I'm sorry about that, guys. I was trying to get my other screen going. I'm so sorry. Please go on.
Yeah. So basically, that's it. And anyone buying my book will certainly be learning something in regards of the problems, which are enormous. I think many people do not have yet a real notion about the size of the problem. And Lynn Margulis, she said, to go from a few amino acids to a first self-replicating cell is a bigger step than go from a first living cell to a human being. So it is absolutely an enormous problem. And I think I am demonstrating that pretty clear. I am mostly letting the scientists which work in the field and the science papers speak, quoting most part, and then just giving a few additions and comments. At least I am not constrained to naturalistic explanations, since I think good science permits the evidence to lead wherever it is, and I am not working in the field, so I am free to give an explanation which does not have to conform with the consensus. And I think it is very clear that intelligence had to be there in order to instantiate and create life. And I think this will be pretty clear demonstrated in my book.
Fabulous.
Sal,
Emory,
do you mind if I blow Otangelo's horn for him for a few seconds?
please.
So I got to read part of, not the entire thing, but I got to read a preview or a sample of Otangelo's book when he was in the production stage. And I was blown away. I have a background in genetics, background in not cell biology per se, but like a lot of the things that were involved in origin of life chemistry, origin of life research. And I was just blown away by how much I was learning. And the sources are all there. Everything's there to be to look up. So if you're interested in that topic at all, I would highly recommend you pick up Otangelo's book and keep waiting for the next couple of volumes. How many volumes are you doing, Otangelo?
Well, since I was basically 6 months only dedicated in chemistry, I said, let me change a little bit. And now I'm actually working on evolution. And it's a lot of fun. And I have about 50 pages ready. I can, in private, share the link to it so you guys can have a look. And yeah, my next book will be about evolution.
Fabulous. You're very generous to offer me to review it. I have people that know what's been going on in me. I've just been too swamped to do anything. I have a backlog of 5 scientific papers with 5 different researchers that I haven't even in various stages. So, and I'll also be making some announcements. Otangelo, I tried to put your link in the side chat. It's too big. That's that obnoxious side chat limit of 200 characters. If you type something in the side chat, I'll make you a moderator.
Sal,
yeah,
you can trim that down. Use tiny URL. You can trim that down to something manageable to put in the side chat.
I'll let Otangelo do it because
okay.
My workload's a little high. I'm gonna mess something up with the buttons. But Otangelo, if you type something in the side chat, I'll make you a mod, and you'll just have freedom to just advertise your work. And thank you very much for your dedicated work on this. You've taken a lot of flack from the internet community, and they probably helped you strengthen your arguments in an ironic sort of way. Emory, if you'd like to introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll have Cindi Lincoln.
Yeah, sure. So Emory Moynagh, background is in science, biology, genetics, that sort of thing. I like to describe myself as a giant nerd who really hasn't figured out what topic he wants to nerd out the most about. I have a website, inhisimage.blog. I do not have a YouTube channel anymore. I got rid of that because the production quality was really low, and I've gotten some new equipment, so I'm just going to restart with all that and do some and kind of split off some of the stuff so that it's a little bit more concentrated on just science on the channel. But there will be a channel once I finish up with graduate school. It's just not there yet. The channel's there. You can subscribe if you want. There will be content eventually, but there's nothing on it right now. Sal, you're muted.
Fabulous. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to update the video description. I actually didn't know until the last minute who was going to be on the panel tonight. I'll try to remember to put your links to both Otangelo's channel and yours. Otangelo, you can type in your channel on there, because there are a lot of people that have God Talk or something, and I actually couldn't find your channel just by Googling. So if you have the link to that, I'll
put it in the side chat.
Yes. And Cindi Lincoln, welcome.
Hi, Sal. Hi, Emory. Hi, Otangelo. Congratulations,
Hi.
Otangelo. That is very exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you going to do an Audible so that lazy people like me don't have to read? We can listen.
Well, I don't think so. My dedication now is to write on the second book that I am on.
Right.
And it is book. The first book is has 170,000 letters. So if I would have to read it, that would take quite some time. So it's.
Maybe I'll read it for you. That sounds really exciting.
Wow. Cindi, there is a technical problem there. What device are you using to communicate?
My iPhone.
Okay, it has a little bit of staticky thing. That's StreamYard is just really a heavy application, and I don't know why it's not handling your audio good this time.
Is it better if I mute?
No, when you talk, that's when we hear all the static come in when you talk.
That's what I said. So it's better when I mute.
You can, Cindi, you can stay unmuted. There's no static as long as you aren't speaking. It doesn't really matter about the status of your microphone.
Oh, when I'm done eating, I will switch to my laptop.
Okay, so do you want to just listen to us for the time being?
Yeah.
And I can read Aron Ra's a little bit of his interaction with me. Let me just share kind of the bottom line of what he had to say. So Jesse Garcia asked, "What's this with Aron Ra?" First, we had a debate October 5th. It was Cindi Lincoln and I as a tag team against Aron Ra and Dr. Chris Thompson, a professor of neuroscience somewhere. And James connected all four of us. Cindi replied to all four of us and just started talking. And then Aron Ra said, "Hey, I prefer to do this outside, but since Sal and Chris are here, that's okay." I actually respect him for that he wasn't going to interact with Cindi privately. He wanted everything to be witnessed. And I absolutely respect him for that, because then there's not going to be, it's not going to be one of these things where someone said something and characterized it one way and someone else would characterize it another way. It could be witnessed. I had asked that the emails also be released publicly, and so that's freeing up things. So I encouraged, Aron said, "Cindi, you've been lied to, taken advantage of by all these creationists like her ex-husband, Kent Hovind, and more or less he felt he could set her straight." And I encouraged Cindi, I said, "Go ahead, you might learn something from him." And so he started emailing her and then copying me and Dr. Chris. And
Sal, can I pause you? It may just be me, but your audio is kind of going in and out.
Yeah, your audio
is very fuzzy.
Oh boy, StreamYard screwing up again. Even on
this. Better.
The moment I said something, it fixed itself.
Okay, let me see. Let me just check my settings here.
Maybe you have just to be closer to the mic, because now I hear you well.
Okay, I have a blue. Okay.
Now you are clear. Now you're
all right. I brought it close. I have one of these directional mics, so I have to talk. Thank you. So I'll try to remember that, and I'll try to, be a little bit more assertive. So anyway, he started sending emails, really long emails, and it was kind of his evolution course. He said, if you go through all this, and you agree with everything, you'll be an evolutionist by the end. And so this email had been going on, and lots, Cindi had been just tied down with a lot of things down there where she is. She's recovering from a lot of problems that were inflicted on her by another creationist, Kent Hovind. And that's also got me in trouble because I stood beside her. I'd like to thank all the Christians that have supported me for supporting Cindi and all those who have supported Cindi. It's gotten pretty bad on the internet to the point Standing for Truth, or SFT, I don't like to call him Standing for Truth, SFT. He publicly is calling me a fraud and all these vile things about me. And I'm just like, I'll take it because I'm standing for what's right. So Cindy's been going through a lot, and Aaron's just been badgering her and say, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And we're going to go through some of those emails. The main topic for tonight is the definition of evolution. And I actually, when I read it, I said, this is a very subtle rhetorical trick. And I was cautioning Cindi. I said, don't react reflexively. This is a lot tougher than you think. But let me share, occasionally Aaron would take a jab at me in the emails when he's writing to Cindi. And finally, I took exception to that. And we had a back and forth. Let me show you the kind of one of the end results of the back and forth. So I'm going to share my screen. And he described me this way. My favorite quote from Darwin is this: ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. It is those who know little, not those who know much, who so positively assert that this or that problem will never be solved by science. And then he says, you're demonstrating the truth of that statement, Sal. You're not a smart man.
Wait,
So
you
that's what he-
actually said that?
Oh, you know what? Maybe
You
I think he
actually
forgot.
said you're not a smart man?
Yeah, he said that. Okay. What may have happened, and I noticed he forgot to CC you on those communications.
Can I quick comment to that, Sal?
Yeah.
Well, this is clearly an at-home attack, and usually who makes at-home attacks hasn't arguments left.
Yeah.
So he's on the loser side, because if he has such a strong case for atheism, for evolution, for everything that he stands for, he would just say, these are the facts. That's it. Then you make with it whatever you want, without lowering his level to personal attacks, which he makes constantly. I had a long exchange with him on a forum, and he calls us constantly liars. And
Yeah.
I mean, anyone that is really, in a minimal sense, professional, who is a scientist, and I am not a scientist, but who is a scientist, focuses on the science and just presents what the facts are, how he interprets, he makes the interpretation of the facts, and then leaves it to the audience or to the interlocutor to make up his mind or not. And as soon as he starts to call you not the smart man and this and that, then he has already demonstrated that he is not up to your level.
So thank you for the.
That's sad. I was actually hoping we would have legitimate science exchange.
Well, he failed to copy you on those exchanges. And I had a feeling this will be the first time you'll hear this. And so now you're hearing it. And he gave me permission to publish this. So I was insistent, I was grateful. So I thank God that he said yes, because now you're going to hear this. Everyone's going to hear it, what he has to say about me in that interaction. If he really thinks.
Sal, can I interrupt you, please?
Yes.
I think you making public what he says about you is not constructive for anyone. And I agree with Cindi on that. So if you permit, I would suggest that if he has emails where he presents what he believes and why, that would eventually be really interesting, and then we could have a critical eye on it and look at it and then give our comments. But if it is just about how he calls you names, I think this is not constructive for anyone.
Well, what had happened is you're
Sal,
missing.
can
Please
I
go ahead,
jump in
Emory.
just for a second? I understand bringing it up that this is the level of dialogue we're dealing with, but I do think I'll go along with Otangelo. I think I prefer to deal with his science rather than dealing with. He's proven that he doesn't have a whole lot of character just from that particular email. We can leave it go at that and deal with the rest of the science from there.
Right. Well, I wanted to. Okay, so this was on the 28th. So there were a number of emails starting from like October 6th or so. And this is where it devolved to. And I didn't participate much. It was mostly between him and Cindi. But then he took a few jabs at me, and then I had to weigh in. And then I actually did hammer him with science. But, and I can share those. Let's see, we're going on 21 minutes. I can go into those eventually if we have time or if there's interest. And if Cindi, you want to hear kind of the nasty things and then the back and forth. I had shared this with my prospective debate partner, Rebecca Davis. She said my counters are really, really good. And I'm just like, I expected him to react badly because I think he just got bulldozed and he didn't know how to handle it. The arguments I put forward were just way over his head. And I took a few jabs myself. And it made me feel good.
Yeah, so let's see them.
So, but this is the beginning of it. Let me show what he's trying to get Cindi to agree to something. So let me see. He's trying to get Cindi to agree.
Basically, with everything he said.
So he has a definition.
Has he been able to convince you on anything that he presented to you?
Not that I can recall right at the moment. It's been actually a really, really lot. But when he asked if I would agree, I said, he asked if I understood and agreed. And I said no, and that I would consider it more because it was so much. I had to reread it when I was more mentally available.
Okay, let me just stop here at the first sentence. Science is not a mere belief like religion is. Can we stop at just think?
No, I wanted to focus on what he's trying to get Cindi to agree to because he has so much extraneous stuff.
Okay, let's go.
And I'm going to compare this also with the Berkeley definition. It's close. So he says, unless otherwise specified, when scientists use the word evolution, they are referring to the one and only scientific explanation of biodiversity, summarily defined descent with inherent genetic modification. Paraphrase for clarity, it is a process of varying allele frequencies among reproductive populations, leading to usually subtle changes in morphological or physiological composition of descendant subsets. When compiled over successive generations, these can expand biodiversity when continuing variation between genetically isolated groups, eventually leading to one or more descendant branches increasingly distinct from their ancestors or cousins. And he's trying to ask Cindi whether she agrees with that or accepts it. I'm saying timeouts. I called Cindi like 5 times. I said, you got put on the brakes before you respond. This is a lot more crafty and subtle. You may need some training to understand it, even a little bit more to counter it, because it's actually a lot better than it's not trivial. And now let me read the introduction to evolution from the Berkeley Evolution 101 website. It's very similar to what Aron said. Biological evolution, simply put, is descent with inherited modification. This definition encompasses everything from small-scale evolution, for example, changes in frequency of different gene versions in a population from one generation to the next, to large-scale evolution, for example, the descent of different species from a shared ancestor over many generations. Evolution helps us to understand the living world around us as well as its history. Okay, let me time out just a little bit here. say, to be fair to Cindi, most of her training in creationism has been at the morphological level, dinosaurs, big creatures, whole systems. I've been trying to teach her the molecular side. Maybe only 2 weeks, and I'm sorry for the sirens back there. Maybe 2 weeks before the debate, I said, Cindi, I need to school you up on the central dogma of molecular biology. She had to learn DNA and the role to make proteins. And it would be helpful for her to kind of relearn some of that. So that's where she's a starting point. For her to understand even the paragraph, she might have to revisit some of this. So guys, go easy on her. And I'll tell you what my thoughts are on this. There's subtle omissions here in this definition that makes it unscientific, but it's not obviously flawed. It has to be carefully understood and studied.
Well, the opening statement is unscientific. The one and only scientific explanation of biodiversity. I guess, the assumption is we're chopped liver.
Yeah, well, I would also not read into that. That's Ra's bias showing. I would read the Berkeley statement on that a little bit more than I would read Ra. Ra can afford to be openly biased. The University of California, Berkeley has to hide it a little better because they're getting tax dollars.
Yeah, I would agree. I would second Emory. That's not the part. You can challenge that, but I'll tell you the way. Okay, I'll tell you where the subtlety is here. It says is a small scale. Okay, changes in the frequency of different gene versions in a population from one generation to the next to large scale evolution. For example, the descent of different species from a shared ancestor over many generations. This is omitting so much. And I was thinking, how could we word this to say that this is a scientific theory? I would say it has, in a way that's consistent with in a way that is within statistical expectation based on physics and chemistry. If you added that sentence, this becomes a scientific hypothesis, and it's actually also falsified at that point. But all those omissions in the definition. Go ahead, Otangelo.
Okay, I think that Steve Meyer from the Discovery Institute, he made very good distinctions, and I will quote them here. What is fact and undisputed in regards to evolution? 1, change over time, history of nature, any sequence of events in nature. 2, changes in the frequencies of alleles in the gene pool of a population. 3, limited common descent, the idea that particular groups of organisms have descended from a common ancestor. And 4, the mechanism responsible for the change required to produce limited descent with modification, chiefly natural selection, acting on random variations or mutations. And what is not fact is universal common descent, the idea that all organisms have descended from a single common ancestor. And 6, the idea that all organisms have descended from common ancestors solely through unguided, unintelligent, purposeless material processes, such as natural selection acting on random variations or mutations. That the mechanisms of natural selection, random variation, and mutation, and perhaps other similarly naturalistic mechanisms are completely sufficient to account for the appearance of design in living organisms. So the last 2 points, these are in dispute. That is the tree of life of Darwin and universal common descent.
And I was trying to give Cindi, I'm not disagreeing with that. I was just trying to give a more succinct counter and say, Aron, I'm actually here to get you guys to help me figure out how to help Cindi here with her response. We need to point out this is a very unscientific definition. It pretends to be science, but the rhetoric is good enough. I mean, don't underestimate the power of the rhetoric. And I can see the rhetorical maneuvers. There's lots of equivocation, lots of redefinition, lots of things unsaid that should be said, and we have to uncoil it. So first off, is Cindi, are you familiar with the concept of what alleles are? Alleles.
Yes, they're the things that control the traits. Is that correct?
All right. What's the relationship of a gene and an allele?
If my understanding could be wrong, but I think a gene is a huge long chain of alleles.
Okay, Emory, we have our biology grad student. You took a course in genetics. Can you set Cindi right?
Well, okay, so this really depends because no, seriously, different people put different definitions on this. She's actually not as far off as you might be thinking, Sal, because a lot of people will refer to an allele as just a single point in the genome. Any point. It could be a single nucleotide or it can be a long strand. A gene generally is something that codes for protein. That is generally the accepted definition, but there are about 5 other ones out there, maybe more. So what you're looking for here, gene is what is going to, or a network of genes is what is going to code for particular traits, whereas an allele is just a point in the genome, any particular point. Now, that's not how it started, but that's kind of where it is currently.
Okay. I may challenge that. And this is why we're having this discussion, because if we don't agree, this is not good.
Okay, go for it. Well,
and I could be wrong.
I got news for you. Mainstream genetics literature doesn't agree on this.
Okay, so if we go back to Mendel's viewpoint, and kind of thereafter, because he didn't really understand the molecular biology, obviously, back then, I would say a gene.
Can I quickly interrupt and read here what Wiki says what an allele is?
Well, I'd like to finish my point, and then you can go. The gene refers to a locus in the genome, and the alleles are variations at that locus. So you have a physical location.
That is another common definition that floats.
Oh my! Okay, creation myths is a professor of biology. Okay, who's he
saying no to? He could be saying no to me. That could be me. I don't know.
Yeah, let me read here what Wikipedia says about
go ahead, Otangelo.
Okay, an allele, modern formation from the Greek other, is a variation of the same sequence of nucleotides at the same place on a long DNA molecule as described in leading textbooks on genetics and evolution.
That's the wiki one. Okay, so
yeah.
I said, so for this is an evolutionary biology professor. So Cindi, I would just share, if I actually put Aron in touch with Dr. Dan here, so they know each other now, and so if you have this definition by Dr. Dan, you could probably fly with it with most anyone, because he's a professor of biology at Rutgers University. So this is pretty good. He said allele equals a variant at a specific site. And so when you say at a site, is that the entire gene locus, not just a single nucleotide?
Read his next comment, Sal.
Okay.
As well.
All right. Normally, alleles refer to variants of genes, but don't have to. Can be referred to any place in the genome. An allele would be a variant of the sequence at whatever location. Okay. All right.
I told you, this is complicated.
All right. Okay.
So let's suppose if you have a variation with 10 nucleotides, that would be a different allele, right?
Okay, if we're talking about a gene, we could have multiple alleles in a population of, so he said, okay, so for blood type, you have A, B, and O. These are 3 main alleles for blood type gene. And there's also the M. I think there's an M blood type. So you have actually 4. And so that is a variation at a specific site. And yes, 2 alleles can vary by a single nucleotide, but then you can also have multiple You can have multiple variations. Therefore, you could have one gene with many alleles at that gene locus. Okay, here's the professor of biology. No, this is good, Cindy. I want you to try to appreciate what you're getting into, because this is okay. An allele has one definition, Mendel loci allele, in my general biology non-major course, and a different, more modern genetic definition in my genetics course, like what Creation Myths said. Okay, so we'll go through this. For example, the normal hemoglobin allele and the sickle cell allele differ by a single nucleotide. So there are two alleles for the hemoglobin gene. I forget if this is alpha or beta.
Good heavens, I'm trying to remember now. I should know that.
Two alleles for the
I'm too tired.
hemoglobin gene.
Well,
Because-
because I like to keep things simple, essentially, an allele controls the things that can vary. Humans can have different blood types. They can have different hair colors. They can have different eye colors. Is that a stretch or is that accurate?
I think that's fair.
It's getting close.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say
We're in the ballpark.
allele
It's not-
expresses a different, an allele will correspond to a different variation of a trait. It will, but there's some subtleties here because of Mendel's law of dominance. So like there are, you might have two alleles, and one may dominate and it'll express. So like I think in the case of Mendel, you can have, let me show the Punnett square, and some of the Punnett squares are not so good. Guys, if you want to talk while I try to bring this up, and then we can talk about the Punnett square. I'm sorry to hammer you with this, Cindy, but this is what you're going to get into if you're trying to understand the definition Aron's trying to get you to accept. I'm trying to equip you to understand what he's trying to say first.
Yeah, I'm going to back Sal up on that. You start going down the evolutionary rabbit hole more than us on the surface, and you're going to get into heavy genetics eventually. You just can't avoid it.
Well, my point is, we're talking about variations within a human, for example. They are insufficient to take it outside of the human kind and into a different kind. Which
maybe I can share what my understanding is, where actually the entire evolutionary construct fails. And I see it like this. When we are talking about small changes, they happen, mutations happen, natural selection eventually happens as well. It can be random, it can be pre-programmed. But when we are talking about the big changes and the new organismal form, like the origin of limbs and eyes and ears and shells of turtles and feathers and so forth, then that is the big question. Where do these forms come from? Is it sufficient to say that these different variations of alleles are selected and then over long periods of time and replication, we get these new forms? That is the big question which is in the air and which is basically the dispute between creationists and proponents of evolution. And for what I have studied so far, in reality, in order to have an organism that adapts, that develops, and gets its form, it's not just genetic information. And these extended new proposals, they are incorporating epigenetic mechanisms and also signaling pathways and so forth. But in the end, whatever they expand, the ultimate explanation is always there is no creator or no intelligence involved. And that is the big question and the big issue in my understanding. When actually is the threshold reached when we have to say, well, either natural selection or drift or gene flow is not sufficient, or it is so complex that intelligence had to be there in order to instantiate all these different and variegated mechanisms, not only on the genetic and epigenetic level, and all these signaling pathways. And I think upon what we know today, it is pretty clear that non-guided mechanisms alone are too restricted. They are not sufficient to explain the biodiversity and the complexity.
Well, I want to really get Cindi focused on responding to Aron's specific question. I think she can do it successfully, but I really want to educate her on this. Unfortunately, this is the diagram I got for Mendel's P's, and I don't really like it. We have three professors of biology here in the side chat. We have a graduate student here.
That is not the best or simplest diagram I've ever seen.
Okay, all right, guys. Okay, we have Dr. Joel and Creation Myths. They're recommending OpenStax. Biology 2E is good place to start. So I'm gonna okay. Just because of that, Emory, I'm gonna dump that diagram. I'm gonna go to Biology OpenStax. We're gonna maybe revisit this topic and get Cindi spooled up on alleles.
Yeah,
she's close.
I would do a monohybrid cross rather than a dihybrid cross to start with, Sal, just because I think that'd be simpler for her.
Okay,
well,
monohybrid.
I had one of those charts in the Science Center.
Yes.
Mendel's P's. Okay, you can have either a yellow pea or a green pea, a pink or purple flower, or a white flower, but it's always going to be a pea.
You have a very good instinct there. Okay, so now you're understanding and there he just said better to just watch a YouTube. Okay, so you're getting this from a biology professor. Thank you, Dr. Joel. And then Creation Myths, he's another professor of biology here. He says, I'm sure there are open source genetic resources too, but the OpenStax Biology 2E is a good place to start. So I think your instincts are right. Maybe it's good to review that. And then now let's go back to the Berkeley definition of evolution, which Aron's trying to get you to agree or disagree. And there's here's another biology student, Paleologos. Okay, this is great. We have the creationists who are biology students, science students. We have the professors who are evolutionists here in this discussion. This is a good discussion now. So I just want to encourage Cindi here not to go too quick. We're very eager to try to make the point and finish it quickly. I usually say just be a little bit more, just a little circumspect. Think about what you're saying, and you can attack this. Even I was having a hard time saying, I know this statement is faulty, but diagnosing it and being able to rebut it succinctly is the problem. If you can put a one-sentence rebuttal, it's powerful. There's a saying, brevity is authority. Brevity is authority. So,
well, Sal, can I quick answer to?
Quick answer, please.
What I don't think that Aron is wrong in his definition, and also the Berkeley is not wrong. I think the problem is not the definition. The problem is what is actually true in regards of what is being said there, and that is it true that common ancestry is true and the tree of life, that all life forms have a common ancestor? That is the key question which is in dispute.
No, I've recommended to Cindi, it's going to be easier to argue complexity first, then you attack common ancestry. It's very easy to argue against complexity evolution, and I have this in mind, and I'll stay why. It has to do with the protein orchard that was discussed in our debate. The other side totally ignored it, pretended it wasn't I kept hammering Aron. I said, how does your definition of macroevolution solve this problem? And I think it really just flew over his head. I think the statistics just didn't register. Whatever it was, I don't care. So Otangelo Emory, would you be fine saying if Cindi said, I accept that that's what biologists accept, but it doesn't mean that it's a good definition.
I might even argue that that's what biologists accept, considering I've taken a bunch of biology classes and I've gotten slight variations on that, but it wouldn't be too much of a stretch.
Well, the truth is, when someone talks about evolution, then of course it is important to make distinctions. What this means when we are talking about evolution? Are you talking about the small adaptations? Are you talking about the origin of organismal form, the big changes? What are we talking about? I think in any discourse about evolution, it has to be clarified what is being the topic in regards of evolution, right?
And I think that's the powerful one-sentence reply. I gave you the one. This is a conflation of universal common ancestry and adaptation, resistance, and breeding principles.
Okay.
They're conflating.
Exactly. That has to be separated.
All right. I'm gonna just insist, Cindi, we try to, if you want simple, you have to accept some things for the sake of argument. It doesn't mean you have to agree. I've said trying to attack common ancestry is very difficult.
No, I was saying they were conflating common ancestry with adaptation, resistance, and breeding principles.
They conflate a lot of things, and I'm glad you're seeing that. So I'm just going to suggest we can accept for the sake of argument common descent, like Michael Behe does, and he still has. Okay, but do you understand why? Do you understand the technique of accepting something for the sake of argument? It shows proof by contradiction. We've done that a lot in mathematics. That's what we did in our opening statement. We said, let's just accept this. Do you remember? Accept the tree of life, but then you end up, what we showed was.
But we're only accepting it for the sake of argument.
Correct. So you point that out, and then this is the diagram no one refuted right here. That's the protein orchard. Even if you accept universal common ancestry, there's no universal common ancestry of the protein forms. This is very problematic. And you rightly kept throwing this in Aron's face, and he didn't know what to do with it.
I really don't know that he understood it. It took me a long
It's not only about the proteins itself. It is in regards of the organisms itself, which you cannot track it down and back to a universal common ancestor. That is already a big problem, and I think.
I'm trying to decompose this. You're trying to swallow this all in one step, and this is a very ineffective way to deal with this, because if you can get him to just break on one point, he's going to break on others. And let's try to take the easiest one. He's not going to be able to deal with this. He didn't deal with this in the debate at all. And I'm going to hammer him. I'm going to suggest to Cindi, why don't you keep hammering on this? Because about 4 times she brought this up and he just dodged. I said, just like when James Tour said, I'll give you that. I'll give you that. I'll give you that. I'll give you all of this. And it still fails.
Very recently, there was a new paper from
Dr. Chris Thompson. I want to acknowledge Dr. Chris Thompson. He was my counterpart in the debate. He says the idea that all proteins are descended from a single protein ancestor is not part of the model. And I want to say, that's exactly the problem. It's so bad. The model's so bad, it's not including that. That's why it fails. The fact that you keep ignoring it and it's being excluded, this is why that's why it's a lousy model.
That's why they decided to exclude abiogenesis from the model as well, because it doesn't work. It falsifies the model.
Emory, I don't know why you dropped off. Is there?
No, sorry. The StreamYard froze on my end.
Okay, I just wanted to let you know I didn't kick you out.
No. That was me. I refreshed so that we come back.
Okay, I want you to see what Dr. Thompson said.
Oh no, I saw Dr. Thompson's comment. I saw Dr. Thompson's comment.
It's not part of the model. You see, that's the problem with evolutionary biology. Remember, I was saying they're omitting certain parts that are really critical. They're ignoring it like it's not a problem. And I said, that's why evolutionary biology in science pecking order lurks somewhere near the bottom, far closer to the pseudoscience of phrenology than to physics. It's because they ignore real problems like that. They pretend they've solved it. And Aron's trying to get you to agree to that definition, and where it ignores it in the model and pretend it's not a problem. I want you to recognize that. So
Sal,
well,
can I
let
quickly
me-
interject
can I-
here? So
Go ahead,
recently, it was a paper
let
came
Emory
out
go.
from.
Can we let
No,
Emory
no.
speak?
Otangelo can go. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Otangelo,
So
go ahead.
recently, a paper came out from the Thornton lab, Simple Mechanisms for the Evolution of Protein Complexity. And I made an entire review on that paper, which you can read on Uncommon Descent. And basically, what he is saying is that it is perfectly possible that the protein can have a substitution of an amino acid or two or something like that, and then gain a new function. And my critique on that has been that, let's suppose even that protein gets a new function. So what? Let's suppose that protein has a function integrated in a metabolic network and actually is making a product which then is handed over to another protein in the same metabolic pathway, which then takes that product and continues to work on it and elaborate it and then hands it over to the next and so forth. So if you have a protein in a metabolic cycle and you change the product, then that product maybe isn't useful anymore for the next protein, which would have to get it handed over to keep manufacturing the product and elaborating it. So that will not be useful. If you change the function of one protein, then maybe you have to change the entire metabolic pathway in the same sense as a production line where you have several robots lined up and they work in an integrated, interdependent fashion together. If suddenly one of the robots makes a different product, then eventually the entire production line breaks down.
Well, I felt we could summarize the problem with a simple picture. And
Well, could you elaborate on this, or would you agree with me that this is a problem, or do you disagree?
I don't think it's the most efficient way to communicate it. This picture will communicate it more effectively right here. This is from a basic textbook in biology. So we have, it echoes your point, but it's very succinct here. You have to have, when you have systems that have protein-protein interactions, and it can be extended to other things. The proteins, this is from Bruce Albert's Essential Cell Biology, Essential Cell Biology, 5th edition. And so you have one complex that needs to connect to another, and this can be extended to other things. What has to happen is they have to have an agreeable geometric shape, but then also the charges. You have charge distribution, where the pluses and minuses have to align. So if you have these changes in, if you have changes in the shape or charge distribution, it's exactly as you're describing, but I'm showing visually why it's problematic. This is why most mutations will be damaging to function. It's very hard to construct function where you have to have protein-protein interactions. And I've been saying geometry is the priority. You'll start to see it. This will support the point you were trying to make. So I'm not disagreeing, but this has, I would say, in understanding the problem, this has a lot more priority. If you actually understand it, as I began to look at these diagrams, I'm just like, oh my goodness, it's so blatantly obvious why most mutations will be detrimental, will be destructive to function. When I specifically, and I told Aron Ra, specifically multimeric proteins,
Can I just clarify for the audience that each one of those red dots represents a connection spot that has to be positive on the one protein and negative on the other? And so,
right, so the blue
what
dot
you're
is
saying is a mutation is going to make them unable to connect.
it's going to compromise it. At best, you can make a slight variation, but anything where there's a lot of criticality in the connection, I mean, you can get alleles. Dr. Thompson here, to be fair, says, no, I don't act that they have to be utterly specific, and that's a misrepresentation, sir. I'm sorry I have to call you on that. That is not correct. There is some flexibility, but not a lot. And I'm going to say, at best, I mean, we could take the potassium ion channel and its tetrameric structure. You want to argue that you can start to blow that apart, and it's you're going to compromise the sub-angstrom specificity. There's not a lot of flexibility if you're talking sub-angstrom changes in geometry. So there'll be a little bit of flexibility, but there is a lot of specificity. So the illustration I have is like of a bolt and nut. And if you vary the geometry, it's of one or the other, it's not going to work so well. There's a point you keep varying it. That's why if you subject something to radiation, you're going to start damaging things. Evolutionists used to think that when we could just start mutating things, we're going to get all sorts of new things. They didn't really understand protein biology at the time. This is like in the early 50s. So this is a kid's toy of how things connect. I call that a man-made puzzle, 3D puzzle. This is a God-made 3D puzzle. That's the EZH2 protein. That's part of the polycomb repression complex. And so you could see on the left is man-made, and on the right is God-made connections. And you have even more connections as the EZH2 has to connect to all these. This partnering, this partnering doesn't happen if it's too compromised. That's why it's very hard to get a constructive function, because you can't start with something like this, make a variation and make it something else without possibly breaking something else. This is why when we had these radiation experiments, this is why it's very damaging. So Cindi, did you see the point I was trying to make there?
Well, I believe what you're trying to emphasize is what I think is a generally accepted fact, that 90% of all mutations are deleterious. They are not evolving the system upward.
Okay.
They are devolving the system.
It'd be better to say.
But another problem I would say is
destructive. Use the word destructive. Deleterious has a specific meaning in population genetics, and it's very misleading. So you could say destructive or detrimental.
Yes.
Or functionally detrimental. I'm sorry to be very nitpicky on words, but you have to. I'm trying to make you aware the other side is very crafty in their words, and they equivocate a lot, where they say one thing and it means another thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm trying to give you a little bit of slightly different vocabulary to counteract that. Otangelo, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I would like that to maybe elaborate on that. Let's suppose that we start with a universal common ancestor of the size of a bacteria with 1 million nucleotides. And today we have organisms which have, humans have 3 billion nucleotides. So there would have to be also an evolution in regards of the size of the genome, right? So when you have a duplication, then you have eventually a variation, but you need also to extend the size and then get completely new proteins which aren't there right at the beginning. So you need to have a lot of novelties and also complex structures which interact together. Like if you make a new limb, you need to have the bones, you need to have the nerves, the muscles, and they have all to work together. And you need different cell types, you need entire systems to make the differentiation of these different cell types. You need to know where each cell has to be placed in the new limb, and. So
the
how do you explain that?
information.
Just with mutations that you get that huge new size of a genome.
Okay,
That's a great point.
Okay. Yes, I'm going to acknowledge something here that I need to, they're going to try to ding me on this. And I happen to know about paralogs. There are like 28 paralogs okay, guys, if I just may nerd out a little bit, this isn't for you, Cindi. This is for Dr. Joel and Dr. Thompson. There are 28 paralogs or so in humans of collagen. There's several paralogs of topoisomerase in humans. So there is variation on the same basic form, but that does not mean that just because you have variation on the paralog that it's that flexible. If you take out the beta paralog, you're dead. If you take out the alpha paralog, you're dead. They're very similar, but they have different specificities. So just because we find these paralogs and these homologs in other creatures, it doesn't mean it's that flexible, because we have experimental evidence the paralogs are important. In the microtubule system, you have the alpha, beta, and gamma. You would not establish polarity. The paralogs do not simultaneously exist. So just because you can just do a phylogeny and say, look at all the variation, therefore it's not needed, I have to reject that. The same could be said of the collagens, where you have trimers, heterotrimers. If you have a homotrimer, it's bad news. There are conditions associated with that. So there's probably a little bit more specificity than some of the evolutionists suspect. There are definitely areas where you can change it. You can get an allele, whatever, but that does not, you can't run away from the fact you can have random variation making these precise connections. It's, again, this orchard that I keep showing that Dr. Chris just acknowledged isn't even in their model. And I'm saying that's problematic. How can you ignore protein evolution and try to say you have evolutionary theory? Because proteins are critical, especially if we start to find out a lot of these are orphan genes. So I'm trying to give Cindi a little bit of theory, but we can kind of go back to this definition here, how I would say.
I want to ask Dr. Chris a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr.
He
Chris.
said that, if I understood you correctly, you were saying that those proteins are not part of the model. And I think you were implying that the universal common ancestor, be it a bacteria or a cell, would not have to be a protein? Or are you saying there's multiple common ancestors?
Okay, so Dr. Chris is limited here because he's typing in the side chat. He said the idea that all the proteins are descended from a single common protein answer is not part of the model. And
how does that
Yeah, I
work?
think he is criticizing you, Sal, and I understand what he tries to say.
I never said it was. Okay, let me clarify. If you have multiple independent ancestors, okay, first off, there's some confusion, and I may have added to this. If so, let me first off on an apology to Dr. Chris. He said it's not part of the model that it arrived. So then where does it come from? Where in the model does it say this can evolve? Where in this definition does it make allowance for this to evolve? Where do the independent protein ancestors come from in the model? So I'm going to say, no, they don't. I never, in our debate, we said, even evolutionists say that these don't have a common ancestor. So I don't know what this is a criticism of. I said, even the evolutionists said they don't have a common ancestor. That was already a given. I never said that anyone said so. So I said they have, even by everyone's agreement, these have independent origins. The problem is, if they have independent origins, where did they come from? Where is it sufficient that random mutation is going to make these, random mutation plus selection? Where in statistical expectation can we expect this to happen? That's the problem I have. So Cindi, go ahead. You had some comment.
No, I would like to clarify here quick,
Okay,
if possible.
go ahead.
When we are talking about common ancestry, it is, as I understand, not about single proteins, but about organisms. And of course, you are right that, of course, you have to answer as well in regards of each protein. How did it vary? How did it become different? How did new proteins arise? It is a justified question, but if I am not wrong, I think what he wants to say that the models, they are referring to organisms and not single proteins.
Yes, and
Well,
that's
what's
the
the
problem.
difference?
That's the problem. That's the problem with the That's what I was saying. They're omitting critical parts in their definition. They're pretending it's not a problem just by the way they define it. See, they define the problem in a way that they have kind of quietly erased what the real problems are. I'm trying to say, okay, if you accept that that's their definition, what you have to point out is where the definition fails to address important issues, and it's failing to address the origin of this orchard here that everyone's acknowledging exists.
Well,
I
for
mean,
example,
kept hammering. Go on.
For example, eukaryotic cells, as far as I have read recently, there are 40% no homologs to prokaryotic cells. So the question is, where do these proteins come from? Right? And it's not only about the origin of the single proteins themselves, but they are usually always employed in a system, like in a metabolic pathway or something like that. And they have to be there like a system. If you have a production line, each robotic robot has to be aligned to the other robots in the production line in order to have a functional product in the end. So that means you cannot just change one single protein. You need to change everything if you change one. And then it's questionable if you have a useful product, which eventually is a subproduct in a higher system.
Okay, I'm going to try to address Dr. Joel's. He said, I'm confused. Are we saying evolutionary theory should predict all proteins share a common ancestor? No, I'm saying evolutionary theory needs to account for where these proteins come from. Evolutionary biologists and creationists say that they don't have a single common ancestor, as in like a gene locus from which all these other proteins descended. And that's rather obvious from this diagram here. You can see it. It's the one that Cindi and I opened up with. Let me see, right here. You see that? So you have on the left collagen and on the right a zinc finger. It's very obvious statistically that you're not going to unify that. They don't have a common ancestor. You could see just by the spelling. And then as Cindi was kind of alluding to, this one is like 1,500 amino acids. This one's only like 500. I mean, it's just, okay. So we're both in agreement. The major protein families do not have any explanation for their origin in terms of common ancestor. Okay, so if you say independent, well, then how do you do that?
That's why I was asking.
Do we not have to approach the problem from a systems perspective? I will give you an example. Let's suppose you have a first universal common ancestor that doesn't photosynthesize. And then somewhere in the future, right after the origin of life, you have cyanobacteria which do have the function of photosynthesis. But photosynthesis has 26 protein complexes which are interdependent. They work together. And for example, a chlorophyll molecule, if you don't have chlorophyll, you don't have oxygenic photosynthesis. So you have to ask yourself, well, where does it come from? And then you go and investigate and see it requires 17 biosynthetic steps with 17 enzymes to manufacture chlorophyll. And then you have to ask, well, what do these enzymes do if they are not producing chlorophyll? Because the last 5 or 6 enzymes, they are used exclusively in that biosynthesis pathway. So if you don't have the entire system, these enzymes, they have no function. If you don't have all the 26 protein complexes, then eventually chlorophyll has no function. So isn't it an all or nothing business cell? Do you know, is chlorophyll not a system, an irreducible system that it is either it comes to exist all at once, or the single proteins or parts, they have no function and they could never evolve by unguided processes?
Not only that, they can't exist by themselves. They have to be in a system.
So, okay. I
And the
agree with
question
you.
is, why
No,
would
no,
evolution
I
produce a
agree with you.
chlorophyll if it
Okay.
has no function
Okay, hang on.
outside of the
Otangelo.
photosynthesis process?
This is. I'm trying to point out. Okay, so Dr. Chris asked, "What's your model?" I'm saying my model is evolution is stated is wrong.
Our model is special creation.
Yeah, model
Yes,
special creation.
Sal, could you comment to what I could try to convey?
But let's go to this because Aaron has an outstanding question. We owe him for our benefit, we need to respond to him succinctly. Brevity is authority. Okay, brevity is authority. Succinctness is powerful. So I'm trying to get back to this. We need to give him a succinct answer, not a book. And this is why we have to think through this, something that she could say in 2 sentences. So the consensus is this is pretty good definition, and we can agree with Aron. Cindi could go back and say, well, this is the definition. I accept that this is the consensus definition among biologists, evolutionary biologists, or something like that. But I don't accept that it's a good definition of the problem. Something like that.
Well, if I can answer to that, Sal, I don't think that the problem is that
I'm sorry to be harsh. Can you answer it in 3 sentences? Because that's what I want to give Cindi. Give her a 3-sentence one. And it takes longer to think how to answer succinctly than it does verbosely.
Yeah. The problem is not the definition of evolution. We can describe evolution as an explanation of all biodiversity. The problem is if it's true, and if indeed the model of evolution is true, that we have all a common ancestor and that all life forms descend from that common ancestor. That is the big question.
I don't understand how they can say that all the proteins are not required by their model to share a common ancestor, but yet they simultaneously say that all life forms share a common ancestor.
Exactly. Okay, that's one problem. So what they'll say is like somewhere in the genome, some random string started to come together to be the major new protein family. And I would counter and say, okay, show that that's statistically reasonable. So Otangelo, can you repeat what your 3-sentence modification? Okay, so all right, Cindy's going to write back to Aron and say, okay, I'll agree that this definition is the accepted one by biologists and evolutionists. What were your 3 sentences?
What I want to elucidate if the claim is true, that all life forms and biodiversity comes from a last universal common ancestor, and that the tree of life is true, that all life forms have a common ancestor. That's the question.
Okay, I would contest that because we are working from the assumption of common ancestry, working from Michael Behe's model, in other words, which is ID with common descent. I think that's going to be easier to work with. You'll have a lot easier time because then you can start posing questions like this. Because once we start going into criticizing common ancestry, I'm just going to say it's going to be tough. I'm not saying it's not doable, but it can't be done succinctly. It can't be done succinctly.
It can be done succinctly, Sal. I have 10 bullet points which can easily be laid down, which demonstrate why universal common ancestry is not true.
Well, I know you may believe that. I don't think I obviously. Okay, so let me just, in fairness to Cindi, you could see here that Otangelo is a very respected in our community viewpoint. He thinks that he can do it succinctly. I say that you can't. So I just want to be fair to you to let you know my viewpoint's not the only one, and I want to defer that. I invited Otangelo here. He's gonna, he offered his viewpoint. But I really want to focus on complexity because that's a very easy one.
I was thinking that too. I mean, I will not consent to universal common ancestry, but if you do it for the sake of argument, and then you go back to that first life form, if it's a cell, then bam, just what you said, Sal, complexity.
Right.
Cells are not like one single thing. Cells are a system of many interdependent parts. And actually, even conceding that we will go to a common ancestor that's a cell doesn't help them. Where did that cell, all of the parts of the cell had to be there? Pretty much. I mean, how simple can you go? Okay, so let's say the cell is not simple enough. What are you going to say? The mitochondria came first? The nucleus came first?
I think we should dispute what we do not agree with. I don't agree with universal common ancestry, and I don't agree with the tree of life. This is what I fight against. Now, if you want to make it easier and just concede that eventually universal common ancestry is true to make another point which then illustrates why they are wrong, I mean, go for it. But I don't use that approach. I say right from the can, I don't agree with these 2 points. Universal common ancestry and the tree of life. That's what I fight against.
I agree, but what do you think
if I may
about
address
the
something with Dr.
complexity?
Thompson here. No, it's not an argument from incredulity. There's a difference between argument of incredulity and argument by contradiction. This is like saying geocentrism. When we started to find retrograde motion, it's an argument from incredulity that it's not consistent. When we found retrograde motion, no, it was an argument by contradiction. When we have data points that contradict a claim, it is an argument by contradiction, not an argument from incredulity. You keep saying that about us, it's incorrect. I just have to point that out. There's plenty of arguments by contradiction. The complexity argument is an argument from contradiction that evolution can proceed naturally within expectation of chemical and physical expectation. So that's something that they keep repeating, that they keep saying it's an argument from incredulity. I have to point out that is a misrepresentation of the problem. Michael Behe is pointing out it's not consistent with natural expectation. There's a difference between incredulity and contradiction. Incredulity means we just don't know.
Can I make this really succinct for you? Can I make this really, really succinct for you? Yes. The argument we're making is not that our model is true because evolution is false. The argument we are making is your model contradicts laws of known science and therefore cannot be true. That's a very, very simple argument. You have a PhD. It shouldn't be hard to follow.
I use 2 approaches here. I say that I use eliminative induction. If one explanation is not true and we have just 2 possible explanations, then the other is true by default. And I use also abductive reasoning to the best explanation. If we have competing models and one model is the best model and provides the best explanations and has the best predictive power, then I go with that model. So I have a positive case through abductive reasoning to the best explanation, and I have the other case, which is eliminative induction, where the competing hypothesis is eliminated because the evidence doesn't show it to be true, and therefore, again, my hypothesis is the better one.
Okay, so I would like to give Cindi some more time here because she's the one that's going to be in the hot seat. I'd like to hear what she has to say. If I may just make some comments here, Cindi. You are correct about the first cell. You need to have a lot of those proteins. There is a distinction between the prokaryote and the eukaryote. When you go to the eukaryote, as Otangelo pointed out, there has to be a lot more proteins. Some of them have no. Are you familiar with the term homolog, Cindi? Homolog?
No.
Okay. Emory, help me.
No, you can say.
Sorry, I was in the chat. Sorry.
Homolog.
There are no similar proteins in prokaryotes that are in
No,
eukaryotes.
I
There are
asked
many
for a
proteins
definition.
which you
No,
only
I asked
find
for a
in
definition.
eukaryotes.
Otangelo, I asked for a definition of homolog. We need to teach Cindi a few.
So we're talking definition of a homologous protein, right? I'm sorry, I was paying attention to the chat. I wasn't paying attention to you. My bad.
Okay, so all right. I'm sorry we have to acquaint you with this. So a homolog is, okay, there's the evolutionary definition, and then there's kind of the more common sense, where we have the same, okay, when we're talking about proteins, it has the same basic form in two different creatures. In evolutionary theory, it presumably came from a common ancestor. So you have like a collagen in your body, and there's a collagen in the zebrafish. So the collagen 1 alpha in yours is homologous to the collagen 1 alpha in a zebrafish. So I'll let Emory explain what a homolog is in his terms.
So a homolog is, I mean, it depends if we're talking about genes or proteins, but it's basically I'll go with proteins here. A homologous protein or a homolog will be a protein that is similar in structure or in not the word, sequence. That's the word I want. To something found in another organism. Now, this may be due to descent, or it may be due to function. It depends on the organism, because even with phylogenetic reconstructions, you'll have disagreements over whether a particular commonality is shared due to descent or due to due to function. I'm sorry, I'm very tired, Sal. So I may have left.
I quote you here from Wikipedia. In biology, homology is similarity due to shared ancestry between a pair of structures or genes in different taxa.
Okay, so Cindi, maybe a picture will help you.
No, I
So on the left,
understand that. I understand homology. I didn't know it was called a homolog. And
Okay.
basically the argument is that if a collagen occurs in a pig and a human, it means that they share a common ancestry, rather than, well, no, they're just created with the same building blocks.
okay, so we have the zinc finger 136 in a human, and it has a homolog. That means one that's similar to it, zinc finger 136 in a pig. So we have these homologous proteins. That means when we share homologous proteins with other creatures, that means other creatures have a protein with a very similar structure and function.
Yeah, we dealt with that in the debate quite a bit.
Okay,
In addition to a similar building block, you could explain
Right.
it in terms of it requires a similar function. All creatures have flesh, and so all creatures need to have, the collagen or whatever makes flesh. All creatures have to breathe. All creatures have to feed themselves, have a digestive system.
Okay, but there's a reason that we brought up the word homolog here. So you're correct. The thing is, in eukaryotes, there are proteins that there's no homolog in a prokaryote. That means we have something that's not in bacteria. So this protein orchard here, let me go to the protein orchard again, and I'll show you what are not homologs. Thankfully, this is why I love this diagram. You can get a lot of mileage out of this diagram here.
Well, while you're looking for that, I do remember that you told me that there's no way that a prokaryote and a eukaryote could be ancestral.
Yes.
And in fact,
it's going to be without miracles. So bacteria do not have collagens. So that's homologous to eukaryotes, probably vertebrates. They don't have insulin receptors because they don't even have insulin. So that's unique to eukaryotes, especially, I don't know, there's one group like vertebrates or whatever. I don't know exactly. Bacteria and humans do have a variation of topoisomerase. In bacteria is called gyrase. They also have helicase. So they're homologs for helicase in humans and bacteria and prokaryotes. So there's homologs all over. So this is so common to most. I think the potassium ion channel is common to most organisms. This one, the insulin receptor is unique to like vertebrates or something on that order. Same for zinc fingers and collagen. So when Otangelo said there are no homologs, so the reason I'm telling you this is you can modify it from going from a single cell. When you go to eukaryotic organisms, evolutionary theory doesn't have a model for how those homologs, what we call taxonomically restricted genes. That's another. I like the word orphan. It's kind of imprecise. Just go with the word orphan. Orphan group. Emory, did you want to say something?
No, you're fine. You're doing fine.
So I just wanted to modify your argument a little bit because Aron's going to hammer you and say, you're talking about origin of life. That's not evolution. So you go to these other things where you have these orphan genes that are very obviously different from anything else. And I'll share the screen again. And you'll say, there's no theory that explains the origin of collagen. No theory. There's no theory that explains the origin of the insulin receptor.
Yeah, let me give you an example here. I had about a year ago or so a debate on the origin of feathers at Pt.1. And you can you can search and see my 15-minute presentation at the beginning. And basically, feathers are 90% made of keratin. And according to the evolutionary timeline, keratin has not changed in a time period of 200 million years. And when you then check, well, but where did the initial structure of keratin come from? Then you will find no science paper which will give you an explanation. So you have a central shaft of keratin, which has about 32 amino acids, which you need to have, and then you have two side parts of the protein too. But that central shaft of 32 amino acids is necessary, and it is conserved during evolution. And if you go to find out, well, how did it come to be? And there is no scientific or evolutionary explanation. They just say it's conserved. But you can make the calculation. What are the odds to have just a string of 32 amino acids? And then let's suppose that you have a keratin protein, but you need many. You need thousands or hundreds of thousands to make feathers. And they need to be joined in the right way to stick together to make the feathers. How do you explain that? And science doesn't have any explanation. And the development of feathers is extremely complex. So you need to account for all these things.
Essentially, that's an argument about the complexity. The feather was complex from the get-go.
And it's going to be right. See, the reason I wanted to focus on complete first, it's the easiest argument. It's the easiest argument first. And when you have the easiest, even when you've made all these, just like James Torrey said, I'll give you that. He said, he kept saying, I'll give you all the lipids. I'll give you all the nucleotides. I'll give you all the proteins. You're not going to be able to assemble a cell. And so the idea is we're going to give them so many things for the sake of argument, and their theory will still fail. That's the strategy. And the reason I'm pointing that out is we're going to show where Aron Ra's insistence, where he's trying to get you to talk about this definition. What I would say is this does not account. This does not account for the origin of proteins in a way that's consistent with all that we know about science. What did Emory say? He said it so eloquently. Emory, you said you can make this really simple.
Yes, you can make this very, very simple. It basically amounts to we're not arguing that our theory is true because yours is false. We're not even arguing that our theory is true because we have evidence for it. We're arguing that your theory is false because it contradicts known scientific laws.
There you go. Do you like that, Cindi? That's a very low bar. I like low bars because you're going to be able to defend it. You're going to make Aron not talk about Noah's flood, not talk about the creationist model. You're going to make him defend his model based on science. He's going to fail. You see,
No,
he's
Emory, let me clarify here. What do you mean by no scientific law?
If I may finish, Otangelo.
I'm sorry.
The reason I'm trying to point this out to Cindi, what they will do and what Dr. Chris is doing, Aron Ra, they'll ask you about Noah's flood. At the debate, he kept asking you, what about cells on Noah's flood? You know, what's your model for this? What's your model for Neanderthals? You see, what Emory was very quick to see is you don't have to do that to show that his model fails. That's all you have to do, because he's trying to prove to you evolution is true. You're just going to show that it fails from all known science. I love what you said. I need to type that.
Well, honey, you have to understand they believe the polar opposite. And
no,
so
but you can show it. You can show it, though.
We would have to be specific in terms of what known scientific, Emory, you'd have to specify.
Exactly. And we can, but this is where it starts to get a little bit, you have to get into the weeds, and it's not going to be, it's not going to be like a fourth grade argument. You can do it. But I like the way
Emory,
it's up.
So, Emory, I would like to know, you said the problem is the law, the scientific law. I don't understand what you mean by that. Could you elaborate, please?
I mean, I could try. So when I say that evolution violates known scientific laws or known scientific principles, and now I know they like to throw abiogenesis out of the kingdom, but we could start there. That'd be a fine place to start. And you could move up the chain as well, because everything we observe in nature, from genetics on upward, and even really from cellular biology on upward, we see degradation. Yet evolution has to go from simple to complex. Now, obviously, that's not always the route of evolution. Before any of the evolutionists in the chat jump on me, I recognize that evolution can involve some degradation, according to your model. But you have to get some and more complexity.
Okay, let me play here the devil's advocate.
Sure, go ahead.
I will reply. Well, we know that there are many detrimental mutations, but there is also genetic drift, which are neutral mutations. And today is the predominant view that it is not natural selection, which actually drives evolution, but genetic drift, which are neutral mutations, and they over time they are fixed in the genome, and they drive change, and that makes that organisms change and advance and become different and speciate. Well,
first of all, you've done two things. If we had that little, and I know you're devil's advocating, so this is not at you, but you've done two things here. First of all, you've conflated speciation with large-scale evolutionary change. Second, neutral mutations have been dunked for a long time. And recently there was a paper, oh, good heavens, I want to say it came out in Pt.1, I could be wrong. It was a very recent paper, but this year, where they looked at substitutions in the supposedly neutral codon of yeast, and they found that even in the supposedly neutral third position of a codon, over 70% of changes to that codon were deleterious. So the idea of large-scale neutral mutations pushing driving evolutionary change just simply doesn't hold up to the facts. It doesn't hold up to the genetics that we've observed.
Okay.
Not only that, but if you're starting with a limited thing, like what Otangelo was saying, a bacteria has less genes than a human. How does selection do anything when you have few to select from? How do you get
the argument here would
they're not
the argument
because
here
it doesn't create new things, right? Now I saw in the side chat that someone said, well, but science has no problem with that. It has demonstrated that the genome can grow and it can become larger. And let's play with this. So what? It becomes larger. It has been demonstrated. Where do you go with this?
Well, it depends. If you want, do you want me to do you want me to devil's advocate here, or do you want me to actually say what I think?
Yeah, tell me what you think.
Okay, so but I'll actually grant you that polyploidy happens. I'll give it to you, and because I think it does, particularly in plants. But I'll just grant you that right off the hop and say, yep, this happens. Very good. But let's just say that it does. What have we exactly done? We've maybe increased the dosage of a few genes, and also as a follow-up to this, polyploidy generally is followed by rounds of diploidization in at least in plants. So you'll get rapid reductions in the genome. They'll basically just shed extra genes, and they'll do this relatively quickly because. And I'm sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole, Cindi. I apologize. But they'll shed extra genes because the genome is literally just it's extraneous. They don't need it. There's way too much when you go through a round of polyploidization. But sometimes they'll keep some of the extra genes, and you'll get some changes due to gene dosage or due to some regulatory changes. You'll get some small scale changes. What you won't get by means of polyploidization is going from we'll go from a tomato to a maple tree. You're not getting that by the terms of the small scale changes you get from polyploidization, because we have polyploid tomatoes, we have polyploid strawberries. You in the U.S., I can go outside, I can pick wild strawberries. They're tiny.
Can you
explain if I want a real strawberry, I have to get
polyploidy is?
I'm sorry.
Can you explain to Cindi what polyploidy is?
Sure. Sorry, nerd session. I apologize. So polyploidy is a whole genome duplication. So you take the whole genome and you double it. In some cases, we can get as high as 8, 10. 8's usually about as high. 8 times 8 of the original genome is usually about as high as you get. So maybe instead of a diploid genome, you have a what's the word for 8? Octoploid genome. I think that's the word I'm looking for.
Well, another way to explain it is like humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Polyploid, you could have more than that. Your heart cells can have like 8 copies of 8 chromosomes. There's actually polyploidy inside human somatic cells.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. When I refer to a polyploid, I generally refer to the whole organism because I don't get into human cells that much. That's just not my thing. But that is possible. There you can have polyploid individual cells.
So you have a double quantity of suddenly from one. When it replicates, you have the number of chromosomes doubled. Is that correct?
Yes, you've basically duplicated the amount of genetic material. Now, what you haven't done is created any fundamentally new genetic material. Now, the argument here will be there's a 4-step process. I actually just reviewed this for my graduate class. there's a fundamentals 4-step process that you can 4 possible outcomes you can get when you get a duplicated gene. It's aneuploidy, I believe, Dr. Duff, aneuploidy, if I'm remembering correctly. Sorry, this is my nerd zone. What you can have here is that there's neofunctionalization, subfunctionalization, non-functionalization, and there's a 4th one that I'm forgetting at the moment, but it basically is a duplication where nothing actually changes.
Yeah, let's stick to neofunctionalization.
Right, neofunctionalization would be creating a new function for the gene.
Right.
Now,
how do you get that?
Keep in mind, we have to, first of all, we have to get a duplication, and the evolutionists themselves will tell you that neofunctionalization is the least likely outcome. This is in their literature. I've read it multiple times when I've done the research on this. They'll tell you neofunctionalization is not common. Now, even if we get some neofunctionalization, in order to get from a protist to even a eukaryotic cell, you've got to make a lot of changes. So you're going to have to neofunctionalize a lot of genes.
A lot of genes in that. I mean, the smallest prokaryotic cell is Pelagibacter with 1.3 million nucleotides, and the smallest eukaryotic cell is about in the order of 10 times bigger. So
I think Mycoplasma genitalium is the smallest.
It is the smallest,
and
but it
it's
is
like-
not free living. It is a
Right, it's
symbiont,
parasitic.
and
Okay.
it depends
Like
on a host.
1.6 or something like that, if I'm remembering correctly.
It has 500,000 nucleotides, but it depends on the import of amino acids from the host. So it doesn't produce the amino acids.
Okay, guys, can
Sorry.
we? I got to beg. We're trying to get Cindi a simple answer to Aron.
Yeah,
We had-
I'm
we had
sorry,
two
Sal.
things. I want. Okay, so you said. I love the way you phrased it, Emory. It was very forceful. You said this is very simple. Now just speak passionately here. I'll try to type as fast as I can.
All right, Sal, put on a voice to text thing. It'll save you time if you've got the option.
I don't think I have it.
All right, well, if you need me to type it out for you afterwards, I will. Our argument is not that ours is true because yours is false. Our argument is not even that our argument is true because our book says it is, or we have good evidence for it. Our argument is your argument is wrong because it contradicts known laws of science.
So, Sal, could you please write down this sentence after you finish this one?
Okay. Our argument is not that ours is true because yours is false. Our argument is not even ours is true because the Bible says so, or because we have evidence for said so, or because we have evidence for our argument.
Mhm.
This is not our total argument. Obviously, I'm going to argue, but I said the immediate thing, the immediate
Right.
argument.
This is 3 sentences.
Right. Our immediate argument. That means we can argue about the age of the earth and the Bible and all that later.
Mm-hmm.
But our immediate argument, our focus right now is to say our immediate argument is not that ours is true because yours is false. Our argument is not even our
I don't think that's the
argument is
main
not-
crux. I think the main crux is simply to say we see that evolution contradicts known science.
Right. That's the
Can I-
punchline at the end of this.
Yeah,
So,
can I
our argument is that
Evolution contradicts known science.
known principles of science,
Mhm.
I would say laws of science and principles such as chemistry, physics, statistics, or
And
probability.
simple observation.
And we can, you can put it in your own words and we can talk about it. I love this. And it was 3 sentences. That's what I
I
call
wasn't even trying for
powerful.
3 sentences, I promise.
Did you do that in one
Can I
shot?
Can
Or
I
did
give
you have
you
to
an
think
answer in
about
2 sentences?
No, I
put
didn't
it
have to
in-
think about that. I actually spat that out in one.
Well done. I mean,
Sorry.
take that. I mean, seriously, I could go with this and say, take that, Aron Ra. Show that your theory is consistent with physics, chemistry, and probability. Show it. Prove it.
Yeah.
Prove that it
Can I-
makes that definition work. He'll fail, Cindi. He'll fail. You're gonna catch him right there because he's saying, "Will you accept this?" You respond like that. He's gonna have a conniption.
Well, I feel like
I would-
need to
Can I-
give
can
I
I
would
answer
suggest
briefly?
backing that up, though.
Yeah. Okay.
Can
We're
I
going to
answer
teach you
this,
why.
please?
Okay. We'll teach you why. All right. That's be another session. Otangelo, I cut you off, please.
I would, if I had to give him an overall answer to his proposal that evolution explains biodiversity, I would say, and I have put it here in the private chat. You can put it, maybe you can copy paste it and put it there. Instructional assembly information encoded in 33 genetic and 49 epigenetic codes and 5 signaling networks on a structural level in an integrated, interlocked fashion explain organismal architecture. Instructional information make integrated complex systems.
Wait a minute. You have to speak English, honey. What? I'm sorry.
Otangelo, I understood that, but I'm close to a master's in biology. Let's bring this down to a layman level.
So what I would say is that wouldn't be the opening response to Aron right away. We can use that to back up the claim. So like what Emory says, you could say I put in the green, but we'll have to back it up eventually, but you'll be able to do that. You have that protein orchard. You could tell he dodged. I mean, okay, there was part of the emails that I was going back to, and I said, Cindi presented you 4 times. You ignored like we didn't even mention it. And so
you can use a negative argument in the sense to refute what he claims, and you can make a positive argument where you replace evolution with what I am saying, that instructional assembly information and signaling pathways in genetic and epigenetic systems explain organismal complexity, and such a complexity comes always from intelligence. That is the positive case which replaces evolution.
Okay, so that's Otangelo's version. I really like Emory's the most, but I have to give, Otangelo was kind enough to come here. I'll represent it. So this is something to just think about here, which one you want to go with. Do you want to see my responses to now that we've had this? I think this is already almost at 2 hours.
Can I
please
hear my 3 sentences?
Okay.
Control yourself, Sal. I mean, at least count to 10 before you ream it, okay?
I'm muting myself.
No, mute Sal. Okay.
Okay, I'm muting Sal. Hang on.
Okay. Descent with modification is such a loose description that it renders it an abstraction to the conversation. We can see descendants morph, but not to the extent you claim. The extent seems to be the crux of the matter. But that big, huge definition is nothing but an obstruction to the conversation. It's obfuscation. Okay, go ahead, Sal. He's counting to 10. Good.
I can't type that fast. I'm not a court reporter. Can you try to say it again? Slowly, please.
Is such a loose description that it renders it an obstruction to the conversation. That big, huge definition he gave is an obfuscation. It's a clouding of the issue. We can see descendants morph, but not to the extent you claim. The extent seems to be the crux of the matter.
Okay, I got most of it. Descent is such a loose description that descent with modification, such a loose description that it renders it an obstruction to the conversation. That big, huge description you gave is an obfuscation. We can see okay, what do I type next?
It's clouding the issue.
Clouding the issue.
We can see descendants morph, but not to the extent you claim. The extent seems to be the crux of the matter.
Okay, everyone has said something I will totally agree with. So I'm not saying there's anything that's factually untrue. So like in a lot of, this is the art of communication. It's not just saying the truth, but you have to pick among several truth statements that you think can punch the opponent in the mouth harder. So everything that everyone has said, I would agree is true. So the discussion's not about what's true or even what's accurate. It's which one we think can effectively
make Aron think.
right. And
well, the crux issue is that evolution on large scale has never been demonstrated to be true, to explain biodiversity. It's never been demonstrated. It is an extrapolation of what is observed in a micro scale. But you cannot say because micro is true, macro is true. Maybe micro is true based on completely different mechanisms, which is actually what I believe, namely that adaptation is a pre-programmed process and there are completely different mechanisms involved to convey that an organism can adapt to the environment. But when it comes to have an entire organism with all its features and complexity, then there are other mechanisms involved which are much more complex and work in integrated fashion. So we are talking about different things here, and many people don't understand that.
Yeah, it's a conflation between adaptation.
Micro and macro, yeah.
Yeah, we used to call it micro and macro, and it was very easy and simple, but they have come up with some kind of refutation.
Yeah, I was going to say I would avoid that terminology because
that's why I put it the other way. Yeah.
There are two things to avoid: species, the word species, and the word macroevolution and micro. You get the argument to them if you get it to the molecular level. This is what I'm trying to emphasize, and this is what I don't think Aron has ever faced someone like me where I'm arguing at the cellular level, molecular level.
He doesn't understand molecular biology, Sal. I know that already.
Okay. Thank you for that data point. I showed him that protein orchard. He didn't know how to handle it.
No.
Cindi kept pointing to us. How do you explain that diagram, Aron? And he couldn't, and it flew over his head. And so what he doesn't understand is you can have, I'm going to just explain. Let me just relate something, Cindi, that there can be a very big morphological change, and there's not even a change there's not even a new mutation. It could be just a shuffling of alleles, just like in those Punnett squares that you were doing for your science center, except you do it for multiple genes. You can also have a single mutation that will cause someone to be a dwarf. One nucleotide out of 3 billion can do it. Achondroplastic dwarfism, one nucleotide. There are diseases where you have 1 or 2 nucleotide mutations, and it's devastating. Conversely, you could have several genes knocked out in a creature, and it doesn't seem to show any effect, unless it's under a stress condition. But I mean, that's really amazing.
Well, and even if it shows an effect, it's still going to be the same kind, as much as they hate that word.
Right.
And he did actually make some kind of a concession where he was referring to baraminology in some fashion.
This is where it gets into problematic territory if you start to talk at the whole organismal level. Try to get it down to the individual gene level. That's where you can, the reason I'm saying that, this is where you'll win the argument, because the statistics are so clear. Just like that diagram, it is so brutally obvious. If I could show that diagram again, maybe the way to frame it for someone like Aron, how can species...
Cindi, let me tell you something. I don't know the motivation that is behind
Can I finish my point here, Otangelo? I'm sorry, you probably didn't know I was... This is the diagram. How can speciation or Aron's definition of macroevolution, that if we didn't have, like, say, a collagen before, how will it create one? How does it create one?
Basically, the creation of new information.
Large scale, coordinated, large scale, because this has to be all there. These are all or one systems, all or nothing type systems. We use the word irreducibly complex. How does his speciation in macroevolution, what evidence does he have that this will come about? He doesn't have it at this level. I would avoid the kind issue. This is where he will lose it right here. Otangelo, go ahead. I cut you off.
Yeah, I'll put here in the private chat, in the side chat, all my debates, written debates that I had with Aron Ra. You can, if it's interesting for you, you can look it up. What I can tell you is that you will not be able to convince Aron with any argument, because for him, the problem is not the arguments. For him, it's that he just hates God, you know. And I mean, he even likes Satanism and things like that. And I cornered him on several levels, especially on the origin of life, on abiogenesis. And I asked him, how do you explain the selection of the basic building blocks of life prebiotically? Because there was no selection mechanism. And he just came up with, well, because science doesn't know, that doesn't mean there isn't an explanation. And then he started to say that I'm lying and things like that. So basically what they are doing, when they are cornered, they sidestep. But they never, it's very difficult that they concede the point. So if you engage him, it's for your education, because then you will be confronted with questions like tonight, which you can investigate and advance your understanding and use that in future conversations with unbelievers. But don't expect much in a debate with Aron.
Well, basically, we're trying to influence those who he influences, even if he won't. Perhaps there would be some genuine seekers in the audience who will find some holes in his arguments, because him and several others are influencing hundreds of thousands of people with basically non-arguments, and their audience is swallowing them hook, line, and sinker.
Well, what my goal is, and this was in our email interaction with him, I said, the reason I'm doing this, Aron, is I'm going to be, this is an announcement, I'm going to be teaching at a science museum, tentatively scheduled next year, 4 times a year. I have a museum exhibit there. It's a new creation science museum in Dixon, Tennessee. We're having so many creation museums here in the USA. This is $100 million complex. I told Aron, you're welcome to come after me here, because we're going to have this debate again. I'm trying to teach prospective students who are going to be like Emory Moynagh one day. I need to equip them with arguments they can go to university, be in a hostile environment, and be able to survive. And so this is the goal, because I try to say, Aron's arguments are a lot more subtle. Don't underestimate your opponent. Don't dismiss him. I went to grad school and I was like, sometimes the evolutionists had a point. I said, I felt that the creationists didn't address it quite as well as I'd like. And you got to respect that. And you have to have a stronger body of arguments to get you through. My understanding is Emory did not necessarily go through a secular university for his biology undergrad, and that helped. But
I've been open about where I went for my undergrad. No, I didn't.
Yeah. So, but there are others who might go, and it's such colleges. What are the statistics? 60 to 90% of the freshmen will lose their faith the first semester. I don't know what the numbers are. It's high. And one of the reasons is evolutionary theory. I'm engaging Aron because, and I'm glad that he put that Berkeley definition there, because that's what the kids are going to have to work with. And we're trying to counter that for their sake, not to try to convert Aron. And this is the first time I've tried to engage it. I got to tell you, he was saying I was unprepared. Actually, I was unprepared that he would be so anemic. I didn't know how to deal with kind of that level of stupidity, honestly. Just like, I expected a better fight. Come on. And so this is news to me, Otangelo. He didn't really understand the molecular realm very good. So that explains why it was just going over his head. Cindi, can I read some stuff that I want you to be. It was obvious that he probably didn't copy you on his exchange with me when he was actually saying, Cindi, pay attention, and then he didn't bother to put your email address.
Okay.
Okay, so while I bring that up, do you have some comments? And then I'm just going to read this, and then we'll shut this down. I'll let Emory, and then Otangelo, then you have the last word. So first, you have some thoughts. I'll read my email exchange with him, and then we'll let Otangelo and Emory talk, and then you have the very, very last word, Cindi.
Mhm.
So go ahead and talk for now while I try to get this set up.
I don't have anything to say right now. Well,
Okay.
except I think Otangelo's point and Sal's point have a commonality, and that is that we want to in teaching Christians not to lose their faith. One of the things they need to recognize is when the opponent is using tactics that give them away for not open. We need to recognize when they're not open so that we don't allow them to make us crazy. It's in narcissistic terms, it's called crazy making, where they will do things and then say that they didn't do them. One of the crazy making things they do is they say, well, we never say that one species turns into another. But then simultaneously they promote this tree of life that says a bacteria turned into the next life form, which turned into the next life form. And then they still say, oh, well, you're just stupid. You don't understand evolution. I mean, it's crazy making. So in teaching Christians how to back off and not try and force them to stop crazy making, just recognize, okay, that's crazy making, and then, back away without trying to convince them. I don't know. It's some kind of a weird balance between wanting to influence and realizing you can't.
Okay, I just realized something. I need to make an apology both to Emory and Otangelo. It was that I didn't expect Cindi to join us, so that kind of changed the tenor of everything, our direction. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to give Otangelo as much time as I anticipated. I should have told you that when Cindi joined us, that changed the whole dynamic of our conversation. I would have given you a lot more freedom to say. I wouldn't have interrupted you as much. I want to express my sincere apologies to that, but I'm really trying to help Cindi out on this. I should have been a little bit more cognizant to tell you that this changed kind of my original when I wrote you. So I'm very sorry about that, Otangelo. Same for you, Emory.
It's all good. I got my nerd in.
Okay. So now, okay. So Aron was writing Cindi, and he finally started using my name. Aron started saying, I'm not asking you, Cindi, to prove this or that, but Sal would have to do that. And then I quoted Aron here, so that this is Aron's words right here. And maybe I'll give him a nice red color. That's what Aron said. And I said to him, no, I don't, because evolutionists make claims they don't back up either. Have more questions than they can answer, much less prove. And yet they claim they have a scientific empirical discipline. It's more akin to a religion relative to real science like Maxwell's electrodynamics, in my humble opinion. I'm comfortable describing my claims as faith-based or extrapolation-based or inference-based. However, I have serious issues with evolutionary theory representing itself as high-quality science. To quote Jerry Coyne, in science's pecking order, evolutionary biology lurks somewhere near the bottom, far closer to the pseudoscience of phrenology than to physics, end quote. Whether he meant it literally is beside the point, as Coyne's quote accurately describes the status of evolutionary biology. If evolutionism represented itself as a religion, I'd be okay with that. An atheist, agnostic, pro-evolutionist, Michael Ruse, wrote this book, Darwinism as Religion. And this is the description. It says, he shows that, contrary to the opinion of many historians of science of the era, there was indeed a revolution in thought, and that the English naturalist Charles Darwin was at the heart of it. However, contrary to what many think, this revolution was not primarily scientific as such, but more religious or metaphysical, as people were taken from the secure world of the Christian faith into a darker, more hostile world of evolutionism, end quote. I mean, this was written by a Darwinist, atheist, agnostic, Michael Ruse. That's not...
No way.
Yeah, look at that. I couldn't help but poke. Aron Ra kept saying in the debate, "Oh, evolution! Quit saying evolution's a religion, that it's faith-based." And I couldn't help but just poke at him a little bit. One, it's at the bottom of science's pecking order, and even one of his own says it's a religion. So there you go, Aron. And that really got under his skin. So now you know I'm not probably going to get a Christmas card from him. And that said, my stake in this discussion is I want to see Cindi learn new creationist arguments, not the ones from Dinosaur Adventureland. I also told her she has a great opportunity to learn evolution from you, Aron, and I would encourage her to do so, and not to be argumentative, but to ponder and consider. I myself studied under an evolutionary biologist. My boss, John Sanford, sent me to the FAS grad school at the NIH to learn about God's creation from teachers that believed in evolution. He paid for my education out of his own pocket. He sent me there, not Dinosaur Adventureland. To that end, I occasionally debate and engage the other side because I'm developing both secular, peer-reviewable articles and teaching materials for creationists at the new $100 million Creationist Science Center in Dixon, Tennessee, wondercenter.org. So there you go, Paul. I'll hopefully be lecturing there 4 times a year at least, have a few museum exhibits, etc. I'd like to test out the quality of my arguments and exchanges like this before I make them available. That said, it's just the League of Reason site, and I was just trying to set up a separate discussion. Don't need to do that. And I said, I don't want to intrude on Aron's generous offer to interact and teach Cindi about evolution. I'm learning a few things along the way myself, listening and reading what Aron says. I have to deal with what Aron says. I may have to deal with what Aron says in my lectures at the New Creationist Museum. I think Cindi would benefit from experiencing what it would be like to be studying biology in a 4-year university, as the children she wishes to teach creationism to may one day end up there, and it would help her to know what they might experience. So I think her interaction with you all is highly valuable. I had to go through this myself, too. Now is her chance. So thank you all for putting her through the ringer and into the hot seat. I would do her a disservice if I bailed her out every time she gets stuck with a question that befuddles her. Okay, so I wrote that at 3 p.m. I wrote that at 3 p.m. on the 27th. Only about 4 hours later, Aron writes his letter, and he says, Cindi, please pay attention to what I'm explaining to Sal. Sal, the reason you lost that debate so badly is because you came totally unprepared, a situation you still have not corrected. It's not just that you don't understand what evolution even is, but you don't understand logic either. Your whole position was fallacious, being a combination of arguments from ignorance and incredulity, along with the question-begging fallacy which is ubiquitous throughout religion. These fallacies combine to become the God of the Gaps fallacy, in which you foolishly assume that if evolution explains everything about biodiversity A through Z, except maybe for F, P, and Y, that we haven't even figured out yet, then you pretend as if we can throw out everything we really do know, or you imagine that to be evidence of magic, invisible man from your favorite book of the Bible, of fables, but that is not so. In those cases where X is not yet well understood, then it is unexplained. Being unexplained does not mean explained by God magic. You have to show reason to believe that gods and magic are at least probable in that case, where they are really not even possibilities to consider. We cannot say whether something is probable until we can show that probability. Likewise, we cannot know whether something is possible until we have a precedent or parallel or verified phenomenon indicating that such possibilities such possibility exists. You don't even have that. Your God is impossible by definition. Look up what a miracle is to see what I mean. All you have is faith, which is really just dishonestly asserting baseless speculation of impossible absurdity as if it were a matter of fact, pretending to know things you don't know. In other words, lying. You should know that many of the pioneers and champions of evolution and deep time geology have been or are Christians. They're just not biblical literalists. They don't believe in a young earth or Noah's flood because there's too much evidence against both of those things. You claimed to have so much evidence, but we know better. You ain't got any at all. We show that during the debate, and other scientists have since chimed in to show that each of your testable predictions was just you misrepresenting what you misunderstood. You have not even one fact and evidence for creationism, where I have many facts and evidence for evolution, and I will give you the short list on demand, though I prefer to explain them to Cindi each in their turn. You said that you were once a theistic evolutionist. Their position is that the Bible says, let the earth bring forth the living creature after their kind. And that is a perfectly fine description of evolution, since the laws of monophyly and biodiversity do not permit a change of one quote unquote kind to another, unless we're talking about species, which is just a naming convention, a limitation of spoken language, as I will explain to Cindi later. Creationism is mostly an American trend of science denial, beginning with the denial of methodological naturalism, which normally requires that all postulations must be testable and potentially falsifiable. That is why your friends at the Anti-Science Discovery Institute are always complaining that they should be allowed to posit pure effing magic as if that qualifies as a scientific explanation. It doesn't, and it's dishonest even to suggest it the way y'all do. Globally, statistically, most Christians, the mainstream, believe that God magically created the universe and maybe life too, but that he had allowed the natural process of evolution to proliferate diverse varieties. Such people are called theistic evolutionists. Even though they technically believe in an initial creation, they don't believe that God created distinct species or kinds separately. Creationism, by definition, is a rejection of scientific methodology in general and of evolution specifically, holding that God created an orchard of different kinds, which the creationists will never identify, even though that is the entire crux of their contention. You said that you didn't have to defend the global flood fable because some people are creationists but don't believe in that. If so, then for the same reason, if we're going to debate creationism versus evolution, then it doesn't matter whether God exists or not, because most evolutionists are Christian and most Christians are evolutionists. I was a theistic evolutionist once upon a time, yet I would still have made the exact same arguments against you as I did in our debate. Nor does it matter whether God created life or some aspect of cell structure. All that matters is one actual point of distinction between evolution and creationism, whether we accept the model of a single family tree for eukaryotes or if you make believe in a taxonomic orchard instead. That's the difference between evolutionists and creationists. That's why I kept asking about the roots of the orchard that would have had to have been on Noah's Ark. How can we distinguish one kind from another? You already know you can't answer that. No one can, because there's no such thing, and you already know that even if you won't admit it. Similarly, you know that evolution is not a religion, since it neither posits nor prohibits belief in a supernatural soul. When you were an evolutionist yourself, you didn't claim to have two religions. No one does. The creationists call it religion anyway because of the logic, fallacies of projection, false equivalence, and tu quote qui. There is no such thing as evolutionism, and it isn't Darwinism either. You don't even know what Darwinism is, but you misuse that word to create an illusion that accepting science is a faith-based belief, which is another lie creationists love to tell. It is not true that evolutionists make claims they don't back up either. That's a lie too. You make claims you know you can neither substantiate or justify. We have a model that explains virtually everything about biodiversity, which you know nothing at all about. So you argued outside of biodiversity to the origin of cellular structure and the origin of eukaryotic cells in particular. Evolution has very little to do with any of that. We know, for example, that some of those processes are not evolutionary. maybe it's horizontal gene transfer or endosymbiosis or some other non-evolutionary process that we haven't figured out yet. We already know that abiogenesis involves dozens of unrelated chemical processes in variable environments. So the origin of cells may not be evolution at all, but that doesn't change the face of the evolutionary tree arising unambiguously from that point, wherein the only way to defend creationism is to address the phylogeny challenge. If evolution from common ancestry is not true, and some flavor of special creation as yet undefined kinds is true, then there would be some surface level in a cladogram where you would accept an actual evolutionary ancestry. But there must also be subsequent levels in that twin-nested hierarchy where life forms would no longer be the same kind and wouldn't be biologically related anymore. At that point, they would be magically created separate kinds and distinctly unique from those listed around it, as well as those apparently ancestral to it. Those who promote creationism's bewildering inanity should be able to show exactly where and why uniquely created kinds could not be grouped together with any parent clades that would otherwise only imply an evolutionary ancestry. Throw away any other argument you might be thinking about. None of them compare to this. If creationism is true of anything more than a single ancestor of all animal forms, if not the entire eukaryotic collective, or if the concept of common ancestry is fundamentally mistaken, then there must be a point in the tree where taxonomy falls apart, where what we thought was related to everything is really unrelated to anything else. But even though that is the very heart of creationism, none of y'all dare address the fundamental tenet, because you know it's indefensible, imaginary nonsense made up to defend your favorite fantasy. I will engage you here for Cindy's benefit. I will only engage you here for Cindy's benefit, as you have proven yourself unworthy of my time otherwise. Because I know more about both sides. Because I know more about both sides of this argument than you know your own alone. You came to debate a topic you didn't know anything about and had not even a clue what you're doing. Go fix that, then we'll talk. Then I responded later, and I said, Cindy kept pointing out to the protein orchard in the debate. You kept pretending it wasn't a problem for evolution. You want to persuade Cindy of evolution? How about you start with the proteins in the diagram Cindy kept pointing you to, like the zinc finger proteins. Explain their emergence from the standpoint of gradual evolution through functional intermediates, not circularly reasoned, non sequitur phylogenetic arguments, nor your phenotypic level macroevolutionary equivocations. There were a few other proteins in the diagram: topoisomerase, insulin receptors, potassium ion channel, helicase. Explain the insertion of nuclear localization signals in the transition from prokaryote to eukaryote, and the emergence of nuclear pore complexes and requisite translocons. Those issues were mentioned in the debate. You brushed those issues off. Prior to the debate, I encouraged Cindy to watch animations of how some of these proteins work, and animations of eukaryotic nuclear pore complexes and nuclear localization. She found naturalistic evolution as an explanation as unbelievable.
Honey, point your voice to the mic.
Okay, I'm sorry. She found naturalistic evolution as an explanation as unbelievable, even granting common descent for the sake of argument. Is that better, Cindy?
Yes, sir.
If you don't understand why that diagram is problematic for evolution, nor the other things I mentioned, then you're not going to persuade Cindy. If you don't think at the end of your letters to Cindy that you can explain the emergence of those proteins and the issues with eukaryotic components with credible, rational, experimentally based arguments, then just say so up front. I'm making a testable prediction you'll come up with nothing, because I've read evolutionary literature on these proteins, and all their arguments are arguments by assertion with circularly reasoned non sequitur phylogenetic arguments, not rigorous consideration of statistical probabilities and population genetics followed by credible experiments. I would encourage her to listen to you so as to prove my point. You'll fail to make a credible argument in terms of physics, chemistry, statistics, experiment, and observation. You'll appeal to flimsy equivocations of macroevolution and don't recognize taxonomic level changes observed in real time, don't count as adequate evidence of requisite major changes to create new proteins on the order of complexity as those listed in the diagram. The only place your ideas will work is in your imagination, not in actual experiments and direct real-time observations. Hence, you merely have faith assertions pretending to be science. So you don't have to engage me anymore. You just have to do your best to explain that diagram which Cindi kept pointing out to you. Then you can claim victory in debate. Otherwise, you only won in your own imagination, not on the basis of real arguments. Thanks, though, for interacting with Cindi. She sincerely appreciates your sympathies for her, given what Kent did to her. But Kent isn't the source of her belief in creationism, as she was a creationist before she encountered him. And I'm almost done. And I followed it up.
30 years before.
Yeah, so I followed it up. One other thing, it's you who doesn't understand the basics of evolution of major protein families. The issue is the number of requisite simultaneous DNA changes from some starting sequence to achieve functionality in multimeric proteins or proteins that are a critical part of complexes and systems. One such system was featured in the debate, namely the chromatin remodeling system required for double-stranded break repair. It's a system that would require the emergence of multiple proteins simultaneously. If that was over your head to understand, that's not me being unprepared. That's you being presented something that was over your head. The phenotypic changes seen in real time are not an accurate measure of whether there were requisite changes in the genome to create a major new protein family. The evolutionary presumption is such genomic changes can happen gradually, but the chromatin remodeling system of double-stranded break repair is a counterexample to that idea. Appealing to the fossil for the sake of argument only establishes changes, but not whether they are a priori statistically probable, nor does it solve the problems posed by the proteins and systems I put forward in the debate. If the emergence of a new protein family is statistically improbable a priori, as in far from expected outcomes, then at some point it is reasonable to say it is not a natural event. I presented a diagram from Bruce Albert's essential cell biology with requisite charge distributions in a protein complex. Apparently, the significance of that diagram flew over your head. If you want to make accusation of me not understanding, I could say the same of you. You better fix your comprehension of basic biochemistry and stop thinking your taxonomic arguments actually solve the issues, such as creating protein complexes that actually have such nice fits and charge distributions to make functioning complexes. That example, by the way, illustrates why most mutations are at best neutral to detrimental and not likely to create a major innovation of complexity. That's why many decades ago, people gave up on the idea of using radiation to create radical new capabilities in an organism. Instead, it just made a bunch of sick creatures. The way to impart radical capabilities in genomes today is to genetically engineer them, since random mutational changes followed by quote-unquote natural selection are limited in the spectrum of changes they can induce. But before you claim victory in debate, you might want to actually ponder the evidence against naturalistic evolution that I put forward in the debate, rather than pretend I didn't actually put substantive issues on the table, such as the protein orchard and chromatin remodeling for double-stranded break repair. Your idea that speciation could somehow suffice as an explanation for the origin of such systems is what is illogical. But evolutionary biology is largely built on such non sequiturs. That's why in science's pecking order, evolutionary biology lurks somewhere near the bottom. But you're free to prove me wrong in front of Cindi, since you're claiming I don't understand and I was unprepared. And then Aron says the next day, "You're demonstrating the truth of that statement, Sal. You're not a smart man." So there you go.
It's like what you said last time we were talking. It takes 50 hours to rebut all the baloney that just came out.
Brandolini's law. That's why it's terrible to do this in a live debate. It's the BS asymmetry principle. It took Dave Farina 20 minutes to say a ton of BS. I mean, just a little BS. It only took him 20 minutes to dump out all that BS. Took James Tour 40 hours to clean up his mess.
Mm-hmm.
And James Tour is the best. So if you have some thoughts, then we're going to go to Otangelo, Emory, and then I'll give Cindi the last word. But Cindi, if you have some immediate thoughts.
Just incredible. I'm dumbfounded. The way they just confident, it's what James Tour says. They confidently spout out all this baloney.
That long letter by Aron, that would have taken several letters. First of all, the word Darwin, I mean, just some nitpicks. Darwinism is used by Darwinists. There's a peer-reviewed paper that uses the word, and there's a website, the Darwinism Project. It's funny. I mean, I could just blow them away on so many of these points, but I focused on the science stuff, not the extraneous. So Otangelo, if you had, Otangelo, then Emory, then Cindi, then we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for your forbearance, Otangelo. I cut you off several times this evening.
Yeah, I would like to quote here quick. To understand novelty and evolution, we need to understand organisms down to their individual building blocks, down to the workings of their deepest components, for these are what undergo change. So I say most of the debates and conversations in regards of evolution, which are around Noah's flood, the fossil record, phylogeny, and all this stuff, it doesn't really hit to the core. And I think Sol is spot on when he points out that we need to look into proteins and how they could have evolved. And when you look at this level, then the real conversation starts. And then we will have actually a conversation which will be fruitful, because then it will be demonstrated that intelligence is necessary to make proteins, to make systems of proteins which work together in joint venture, like metabolic pathways and so forth, and the building of complex organisms. It starts with the cell and with the inner workings from the cell. The development of a multicellular organism starts with the zygote, with just one single cell, which has all the information to make that multicellular organisms. How do you go from one cell to 37 trillion cells of a human being? This is the big thing, the big mystery. How do you explain that with evolution, even in 4 billion years? You need to specify over 20 different things in regards of each cell, where to go, what cell it has to become, if it is a neuron, if it is a nerve cell, or whatever. And this is far beyond just mutations and natural selection. This is just kindergarten. This is just ridiculous. And atheists like Aron Ra, he spouts out a lot of big words, but he is actually the ultra-crepidarian. He doesn't understand science. He doesn't understand it on the level that it has to be understood. So he is a self-delusional, a blind leading the blind. And I have no respect for these people.
It's incredible how they think when there's nothing to select from in the beginning, that could be the mechanism. So basically what you're saying is complexity and interdependence require foreknowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
Period.
If you imagine that just one human cell has 2 billion proteins, just one, and we have 37 trillion cells. We have 20 quintillion proteins in our body. That is the number of stars in the universe. And these foolish people believe that just unguided, non-intelligent mechanisms explain this complexity. It's just staggering.
Do you have any more, Otangelo, or shall I go to Emory?
Yeah, you can go to Emory.
And thank you for showing up here at the last moment. I didn't know that I was going to have this show at all. I haven't had a lot of streams, so thank you very much. And we haven't done a stream in a while. So, Emory, thank you for giving me the 3 sentences, brother. And thanks for taking a 2-hour, 30-minute study break for us.
That's fine. honestly, I wasn't getting a whole lot of progress done today. I was pretty tired to begin with. So thank you for having me very much. I appreciate it. Lord willing, we'll get to do this some more at some point. I mean, I agree with Dr. Duff. I don't think it's worth wasting a whole lot of time on Aron Ra, because he doesn't seem to be interested in listening. At least with like certain people in the community, I will sit out in the atheist community. I'll sit down and have a conversation with. I did this with Andrew Cumming because he was willing to have one, and he was willing to sit there, and he didn't insult me, I didn't insult him, and we both just we talked science for an hour. And you know what? I'm cool with that. That's fine. We can do that. But if we're gonna play the you're a liar, you're an idiot, you don't understand science, you don't count me out. I'm not playing that game. I've got better things to do with my time. Now I understand why you might find it worthwhile for a period to interact with that, but I think long term that's going to be a lot more painful for you than it is for him. Not because he's right, but because you're going to get sick and tired of it. Because nobody likes to be insulted constantly. So, and once he realizes, Cindi, that he can't convert you, that's where it will go. Right now he's being nice because he thinks because of what happened, he thinks he has a wiggle room way into you. And not everybody in the community is going to do that. I don't think that's why Dapper was nice to you, because I know Dapper. I like Dapper. I don't think that's but there are some people in the community who are going to try to weaponize you against, and not that I'm in any way defending that scumbag. But there are some people in the atheist community who don't care that much about you. They just care we can weaponize her against
him.
And not that he doesn't need it, but just be aware, not everybody who's being nice to you right now will continue to be nice to you once they realize they can't turn you into an evolutionist. And Ra would be in the category that won't be.
I agree with what you're saying. And in fact, that's how I identify a troll and hang up on them, because I've been abused, and I will not allow anybody to insult or name call. That will be a deal breaker.
Cindi, Aron, he sees you as a potential trophy.
Yep.
Well, I see him as a potential trophy too.
Bring it.
Perfect. I love it. Exactly.
Anyway, so that's my 2 cents. You can do with it what you want, but it's late for me, and I need to be heading to bed pretty soon, probably. So thank you, Sal, for hosting. I appreciate it.
Yes. Before I let you go, Emory, when hopefully we'll have a Christmas present announcement from you that you graduated. Do you think you'll be able to get your grades and everything by then?
Well, so my final paper is due. I have to take the comprehensive exam before I take the final paper. The final paper's due on the 3rd of the 8th of December, I think. I'm trying to remember now. I've already sent the draft copy to my professor to approve, so I'm not worried about that. And for those for certain people in the chat who have accused me of not being a real scientist, when I graduate, I will gladly send you my what's it called? Transcript, because it's straight A's.
Yeah.
So I don't want to hear that trash from you. But that said, I'll redact my name, but other than that, you'll get the transcript. The point being, and that's not to brag, by the way. I'm not trying to say that I'm any kind of like super genius or anything like that. There's a lot of people in my class who are a whole heck of a lot smarter than I am. Sal knows I struggled through at least a couple of my. How long did we spend on those homework problems with Sal?
Oh, I love those genetic equations on heterozygote.
Mm-hmm, yep.
Heterozygotus.
Yeah, I had to have Sal help me with some of my advanced genetic stuff. So because he understands the math better than I do. I understand the genetics half of it. I just don't get the math. But the point being, you know, I'm not saying that I'm any kind of super special or anything like that. I'm not. I'm definitely not. But you know, Lord willing, I should be able to, if provided everything goes well and I do okay on the comprehensive, which fingers crossed, Lord willing. I'm not worried about the paper. My professor really likes the paper, so I'm not worried about the paper. But I should be able to announce a early Christmas present. So, Lord willing.
Oh, we're gonna break out the champagne, or what do you call it, sparkling cider?
Sparkling water.
Yeah, we'll do that. So I just wanted to say, just to reiterate before we give Cindi the very last word, and hopefully this isn't the last time Cindi and I talk on air. This has been great. I hope it's been educational for Cindi to kind of hear different perspectives rather than just mine, you know, because she could hear other creationists give their, you know, sometimes different take on things. I'm doing this, I'm engaging this argument because they're going to see the same thing, maybe repackaged. So like this basic definition that they saw, where I said, what are we going to do with that? And I like what Emory pointed out, that 3 sentences. I personally like, that's my favorite. I said, that's the comeback. That's a succinct way, because this is what I will do if I teach the class. I'll say, this is what I wouldn't necessarily even have to say, Aron. I'll say, this is what you'll see when you go to college, or you'll see this. This is the way you counter it. These are the problems where the definition fails. This is where they don't even model things like protein origins. And so I'm not really doing the letter thing to debate Aron. I'm debating the argument because I'll see it maybe from a different person. It's going to be recycled garbage. And I haven't really dealt at this kind of lower level where, you know, evolution 101, because I don't think a lot of evolution even follows 101 anymore. There's like the third way of evolution, and they routinely acknowledge their problems with it if they just read the peer-reviewed literature. And I can't believe Aron was saying all the stuff he said. Look, this is so good. One of the very first slides you showed in debate was the picture of the peer-reviewed article that said, "What's wrong with evolutionary biology?" Did he just like, that wasn't written by a creationist? And it's just like that, just in one ear, out the other. So Cindi, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm doing this hopefully so I can give, you know, it gives me joy to kind of teach you different arguments than the ones you may have known. It's rewarding to me for us to be talking about alleles and homologs. Just kind of, even though you've worked with it before, I'm kind of glad to see you learning this language. I'm here at your service to help you with that. And so I hope we can do this again. And if for nothing else, I hope it's enlightened you and you've gotten something out of it. I'm not saying you go back to Aron and try to bug him with this. This is really more of service to you. So Cindi, thank you. I'm honored you joined us tonight. And thank you for being my tag team partner October 5th. Emory and Otangelo were prospective ones, and they supported me. You're the number one that I chose. So thank you.
Thank you too. It was a pleasure to, you know, hear other people's perspectives as well. And just that I think it's interesting that we each approach the battle a little bit differently, and we'll probably each get a little bit of a different audience. I did want to say that even though I said Aron Ra would be a trophy, I didn't mean it in an objectification where he's an object to me. That's not what I mean, because I would care about his soul. And actually, I think the Lord would consider him a trophy if we could win him. And so it would be in a compliment sense, not he's just an object kind of a thing. I wanted to clarify on that. And I guess in light of what both Emory and Otangelo said about Aron can't be one. The scripture, I learned this from Henry Morris in 1989. It's spiritually discerned. We can give all the evidence we want until we're blue in the face, and they won't be converted without the Lord working with their spirit. I don't understand how all that works, but that statement I heard him say all those years ago has haunted me ever since. It is spiritually discerned. So anyway, if you don't mind, I'd like to close in prayer. Heavenly Father, you are the giver of life. You are the one who opens the eyes of the blind. You are the one that you are the truth. You are the one who can cut through overt lies and maybe just unintentional lies or just untruths. We just lift up this battle to you, Lord, that you would use us as your sword, the sword of the Spirit, that you would help us in this battle, Lord. Go before us, work in the hearts of men to convict the world of sin and righteousness and truth and error. Just help people see the truth, Lord, that you made an amazing world specifically for us, that we would look at things and see how much you loved us and how awesome you are. Lord, the creation is crying out about your glory and your beauty. Help us do the same, Lord. We just ask that you would do the battle. In Jesus' name. And thank you for these men. Thank you for this evening. Thank you for the opportunity to engage with Aron, Lord. I pray that you would make it fruitful. And for Dr. Chris as well, and Dr. Dan and Dapper, and in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Amen.
All right, I'm going to just close with my usual end credits. Otangelo, thank you very much for joining
Yeah,
us,
thank
and
you.
congratulations on your book. And glad to hear that you're getting good reviews on it. Emory, best wishes on your exams. And Cindi, I don't know when we'll convene again, but maybe happy Thanksgiving here in the USA.
I have an idea.
Yeah.
I have an idea. Otangelo, if you want to reach me by Messenger, Facebook Messenger, it's just Cindi Lincoln. I'd love to do an interview with you where you can discuss your book on my channel. I don't have a lot of viewers, but it sounds really cool.
Oh, sure. I would love to do that. Absolutely.
And Otangelo, once my channel gets back, once I start bringing my channel back, I'll probably have you on as well. So.
Cool. Wonderful.
Oh, I probably should have you on as well. There you go.
We're all stealing Cindy's idea here.
Yes, congratulations. Yes, we should give you, because you've served our community so well. So I definitely owe you that, and I won't cut you off like I did tonight. So thank you, Otangelo. So guys,
I want to have you on too, Sal.
Oh, thank you. Oh, by the way, that debate we had with Aron and Dr. Chris, it's now at 45,000 views on modern day debate. So congratulations, Cindi.
Thank you.
You drew the crowd there. So
Yeah,
all right.
well, it was just coattails, huh?
I think Aaron drew a lot, and then you. So anyway, I'm just
I
gonna
just
do
hope
the closing credits. You all can bail
yeah.
out of the studio. Go on, Cindi. What?
I was just gonna say, I hope some of the arguments reached heart.
They will, God willing. So you all can bail out of the studio. I'm just gonna run the closing credits, and thank you again, Cindi.
Night, guys. Good night.
Good night.
All right.